6 months passed since the argument about Tau Ceti, and the galaxy had become a much more dangerous place. The Creks. Hegemony had decided that talking in the council was a waste of time. Why argue with words when you could simply take what you wanted with guns? Their massive war fleets moved from system to system like hungry monsters, swallowing up smaller civilizations. Admiral Vexstar led the conquest personally. His flagship was a kilometer-long monster of metal and weapons called the Iron Fist. Everywhere it went, planets surrendered or burned. The Creks did not believe in being gentle with conquered peoples. On the planet Kepler 9, they enslaved the entire population of blue-furred creatures called the Rylans. The Rylans had been peaceful traders who never hurt anyone. But that did not matter to the Creks. Peaceful meant weak. And weak meant they deserved to be conquered. On Vega 3, they stripped away the atmosphere of a garden world to get to the metals underneath. 3 billion plant-like beings called the Thornfolk died gasping in space. The Creks commanders reported this as a successful mining operation. The Vorthan Trade Federation watched all of this happening and became very afraid. Their merchant ships were not built for war, and their crews knew how to count money much better than they knew how to fight battles. But they could not just let the Creks take over the entire galaxy. Minister Qualdar spent his days making frantic deals with anyone who would listen. The Vorthans offered weapons, ships, and money to smaller species if they would help fight the Creks. Soon they had put together a military alliance of over 30 different civilizations. The problem was that most of these allies were not very good at fighting. The fish-like Aquarians had powerful ships, but they moved too slowly. The Centauri Republic had many soldiers, but their weapons were hundreds of years old. The crystal beings from Ragel were nearly immortal, but they took forever to make any decisions. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian Collective watched both sides prepare for war and decided they needed to be ready too. The Zephyrians did not want to conquer anyone or make money from trade. They just wanted to be left alone to build their amazing machines and think their deep thoughts. But if the galaxy was going to become a battlefield, they would make sure they had the best weapons. Dr. Zara Nix was the chief scientist of the Zephyrian War Machine Project. Her silver eyes glowed brighter than most Zephyrians because her brain had been enhanced with quantum computers. She could think 1,000 thoughts at the same time and solve mathematical problems that would take normal beings years to understand. Dr. Nix designed weapons that could destroy entire solar systems. She built ships that could appear and disappear like ghosts. She created artificial intelligence that could pilot 1,000,000 war drones at once without getting confused. Through all of this growing chaos, the Galactic Council kept meeting every month. But now the meetings were very different. Instead of arguing about trade routes and mining rights, the representatives spent their time making threats and declaring war. Sarah Chun still sat in her back corner seat. She still took careful notes on her tablet, and she still tried to suggest peaceful solutions that nobody wanted to hear. The Creks aggression could be stopped with economic pressure instead of military force, she said during one meeting. If all the trade networks refused to do business with conquered territories, the hegemony would lose money and have to stop expanding. The hall erupted in the same kind of laughter it always did when the humans spoke. Economics? Admiral Vexstar's scars seemed to glow with amusement. You think we care about your pathetic trade agreements? The Creks hegemony takes what it needs and burns the rest. Minister Qualdar shook his blue head sadly. The human still does not understand that this is war, not some business negotiation. When your people grow up, perhaps they will learn how the real galaxy works. Dr. Nix spoke without looking up from her floating holographic calculations. Human cognitive patterns are inefficient for understanding multidimensional strategic thinking. Perhaps Earth should observe quietly while superior species handle galactic security. More laughter. More insults. More jokes about primitive humans who did not belong in the council. But Sarah noticed something that the others did not. Each month, the insults were getting meaner. Each month, the representatives seemed angrier at everything, including her. The stress of preparing for war was making them all more cruel and more careless with their words. She wrote it all down. The breaking point came during a meeting in late autumn. A small research station in neutral space had been discovered by Krek scouts. The station was run by scientists from many different species who were trying to find cures for diseases that affected organic life forms. Admiral Vexstar announced that the Kreks had destroyed the station as a demonstration of power. 3,000 scientists died in the attack, reported a small, mouse-like representative from one of the minor species. His voice shook with grief and anger. They were not soldiers. They were healers and researchers. They had no weapons and threatened no one. Vexstar shrugged his massive shoulders. They should have chosen their location more carefully. Space belongs to those strong enough to claim it. Sarah Chun stood up slowly. For the first time in 3 years, real emotion showed on her face. It was not the anger that everyone expected. It was something colder and more dangerous. I formally request that this council condemn the attack on the research station, she said. I further request that we impose sanctions on the Krek's hegemony until they agree to follow basic laws about protecting civilian populations. The hall became quiet for a few seconds. Then the laughter started again, but this time it sounded more nervous. Earth contributes nothing to galactic civilization, Admiral Vexstar said, standing to his full height of 3 meters. Your opinion is worth exactly as much as your military power, which is to say, nothing at all. Minister Qualdar nodded in agreement. Perhaps if the humans had real ships and real weapons, we might care what they think about galactic affairs. Dr. Nix finally looked up from her calculations, her silver eyes focusing on Sarah like lasers. The human brain is incapable of understanding the strategic necessities of interstellar conflict. Your primitive emotional responses are irrelevant to rational decision-making. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chun's calm expression cracked. But it was not anger or fear that showed on her face. It was a small, cold smile that made her dark eyes look like chips of black ice. She gathered her tablet and her few notes very carefully. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that the entire hall had to strain to hear her. I have been taking very detailed records of these proceedings, she said. Thank you all for being so comprehensive in your statements. Your words have been very educational. She turned and walked toward the exit, moving slowly and calmly like she always did. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. I think my people have learned everything they need to know about galactic politics, she said. Thank you for the lessons. Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of aliens, who quickly forgot about the quiet human and went back to planning their wars. None of them wondered why Sarah had thanked them. None of them asked what kind of lessons she meant. They were all too busy preparing to fight each other to worry about what one primitive human might do with 3 years, worth of very detailed notes that they would understand soon enough. What those lessons had really taught her. The massive space station hung in the darkness like a metal moon. It was bigger than most cities on Earth, with docking bays that could hold ships the size of skyscrapers. This was where the Galactic Council met every month to argue about who owned which stars and planets. Inside the main meeting hall, hundreds of alien beings filled the curved rows of seats. The room looked like a giant amphitheater, but instead of watching plays, these creatures came here to fight with words instead of weapons. Most of the time, the Krek's representatives sat in the front rows. They looked like walking tanks with 4 arms and thick gray skin that could stop bullets. Their leader, Admiral Vextar, was covered in battle scars that told stories of 100 conquered worlds. His people believed that strength meant everything, and they had the biggest war fleet in the galaxy to prove it. Across the room sat the Vorthan Trade Federation. These blue-skinned aliens had long fingers perfect for counting money and making deals. They wore expensive clothes covered in jewels from a dozen different planets. The Vorthans controlled most of the trade routes between star systems, and they never let anyone forget it. Near the center sat the Zephyrian Collective. They looked almost like humans, but their pale skins seemed to glow slightly, and their eyes were completely silver. The Zephyrians built machines that could think faster than most living beings. Their technology was so advanced that other species could barely understand how it worked. In the very back corner of the Great Hall sat one human. Commander, Sarah. Chen wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations or fancy medals. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried only a basic tablet for taking notes. Compared to the other representatives with their guards and advisors and floating displays, she looked almost invisible. For 3 years now, Sarah had attended every single council meeting. She always sat in the same back corner seat, always took careful notes, and almost never spoke. When she did speak, her voice was quiet and calm. She would suggest things like sharing resources between star systems or finding peaceful ways to solve problems. The other species thought this was very funny. Today was no different. The Kreks and the Vorthans were arguing about mining rights in a star system called Tau Ceti. Both sides wanted to dig up the valuable metals on the planets there. The argument was getting louder and louder. Those mining worlds belonged to the hegemony by right of conquest. Admiral Vextar slammed his 4 fists on his desk. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. We have claimed them with blood and steel. Minister Koldar of the Vorthans stood up quickly. His blue skin turned darker when he was angry. You cannot simply take what belongs to others. We have trade agreements with the colonies in that system. Our law says, your law means nothing. Vextar roared. Only strength matters. The Kreks hegemony controls 1,000 worlds because we are strong enough to hold them. The argument went on like this for an hour. Other representatives joined in, taking sides. Some supported the Kreks because they were afraid of their massive war fleets. Others supported the Vorthans because they needed their trade networks to survive. Through it all, Sarah Chun sat quietly in her corner. She wrote notes on her tablet and watched everything with dark, intelligent eyes. She noticed which species supported which side. She noticed how they argued. She noticed what threats they made and what promises they offered. Finally, she raised her hand. The hall slowly became quiet as the representatives noticed a human asking to speak. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. A few looked annoyed that their important discussion was being interrupted. Sarah stood up slowly. Thank you, she said in her quiet voice. I have been listening to both sides, and I think there might be a solution that works for everyone. She paused and looked around the room. The Tau Ceti system has 7 planets. 3 of them have the metals that the Kreks hegemony needs for building ships. But 4 of them have the rare crystals that the Vorthan Trade Federation uses for faster-than-light communication. Why not split the system? Each side gets the planets they need most, and both sides benefit. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, Admiral Vextar began to laugh. It was a deep rumbling sound, like rocks falling down a mountain. Soon other Kreks representatives were laughing too. The sound filled the entire hall. The hairless apes think they can tell us how to run the galaxy. Vextar stood up and pointed at Sarah with one of his massive arms. Your species controls one pathetic little star system with one small planet. We command 1,000 worlds and fleets that could turn your Earth into space dust." Minister Qualdar was not laughing, but he was smiling in a way that was not friendly. Perhaps the human representative does not understand how galactic politics work. This is not a place for children to offer simple answers to complex problems. The Zephyrian representative spoke up, her silver eyes glowing brighter. The human brain is primitive compared to our enhanced neural networks. It is inefficient to waste council time on ideas from such a limited cognitive system. More laughter filled the hall. Representatives from a dozen different species joined in. Some made jokes about humans being too young and stupid to understand real politics. Others suggested that Earth should not even be allowed in the Galactic Council. Through it all, Sarah Chun stood quietly and listened. She did not argue back. She did not get angry. She simply nodded once and sat back down in her corner seat. But if anyone had been watching her carefully, they might have noticed something. As the laughter and insults continued, Sarah made more notes on her tablet. She wrote down exactly who said what. She recorded which species supported the insults and which ones stayed quiet. Most importantly, she smiled. It was a very small smile that did not reach her eyes and had lasted only a few seconds. Then her face became calm and neutral again. The council meeting continued for 3 more hours. The Kreks and Vorthans could not agree on anything, so they decided to settle the matter with their war fleets instead of words. This meant that thousands of beings would die fighting over some rocks in space. But none of the representatives seemed to care about that. When the meeting finally ended, Sarah Chun packed up her tablet and walked toward the exit. As she passed the other representatives, she could hear them still making jokes about the stupid human who thought she could solve galactic problems. That primitive species will learn their place eventually. She heard Admiral Vextar say to his advisors, "Perhaps we should conquer their little planet and teach them some respect." Sarah kept walking and did not look back. But she added Vextar's words to her notes, just like she had been doing for 3 long years. None of them noticed that the quiet human in the corner had been studying them very carefully. They thought her silence meant she was weak and afraid. They had no idea that she was learning everything about them. While they learned nothing about her, they would understand their mistakes soon enough. The galaxy exploded into war exactly as everyone had predicted. 3 massive fleets began moving toward each other like giant metal storms, leaving trails of destruction across 17 different star systems. The Kreks war machine moved first. Admiral Vextar led over 2,000 ships toward the heart of Vorthan territory. His plan was simple and brutal: destroy everything in his path until no one was left to oppose him. The Iron Fist led the way, its weapons already charged and ready to turn planets into burning rocks. The Vorthan Alliance responded with numbers instead of power. Minister Qualdar had convinced 43 different species to join the fight against Krek's aggression. Their combined fleets had over 5,000 ships, but most of them were converted cargo vessels and old patrol boats. Quality versus quantity, and everyone was about to find out which would win. The Zephyrian Collective took a different approach. Dr. Nix deployed only 300 ships, but each one was a masterpiece of advanced technology. They could appear and disappear at will, fire weapons that bent space and time, and think faster than any organic pilot could react. The first battles were exactly as violent as expected. In the Rigel system, Krek's heavy cruisers smashed through Vorthan defensive lines like hammers through glass. The space around Rigel 4 became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. At Volf 359, a Zephyrian ghost fleet materialized inside a Krek's formation and destroyed 50 ships in 30 seconds before vanishing again. Admiral Vextar lost an entire battle group and never even saw what killed them. In the Centaurus system, Vorthan swarm tactics overwhelmed a small Zephian science fleet through pure numbers. 200 merchant ships converted into fighters swarmed around 30 advanced Zephyrian vessels like angry insects. When the battle ended, the space was full of debris from both sides. But as the months passed, strange things began to happen. The first incident involved a Krex supply convoy carrying ammunition to the front lines. The convoy consisted of 20 massive cargo ships protected by 12 heavy cruisers. They were carrying enough weapons to arm 100,000 soldiers, and enough fuel to power a fleet for 6 months. Convoy left Krex space on schedule and sent regular check-in messages for the first 3 days of their journey. On the 4th day, they simply vanished. There was no distress signal, no emergency broadcasts, no debris field or signs of battle. 23 ships and 15,000 Krex warriors just disappeared between star systems like they had never existed at all. Admiral Vexstar was furious, but he blamed the Zephyrians and their vanishing technology. He ordered his scientists to develop better sensors that could detect cloaked ships. The second incident happened to the Vorthans. Their intelligence network was the best in the galaxy, with spy satellites and hidden listening posts in every major star system. This network gave them advance warning of enemy movements and helped them plan their defensive strategies. But suddenly, the intelligence network started reporting impossible information. Spy satellites reported Krex fleets and systems where no Krex ships had ever been seen. Hidden listening posts detected massive Zephyrian formations in empty space. The network that had been their greatest advantage became worse than useless. Minister Qualdar spent weeks trying to fix the problem. His best technicians checked every satellite and listening post, but they could find nothing wrong with the equipment. The network was working perfectly. It was just reporting things that could not possibly be true. This caused disaster after disaster for the Vorthan Alliance. Fleets rushed to defend systems from attacks that never came, leaving other systems unprotected when real attacks arrived. Ships ran into ambush because their intelligence said the space was empty. Battle plans fell apart because commanders could not trust any information they received. The Zephyrians had their own problems. Their greatest advantage was their quantum communication system, which let their ships talk to each other instantly across any distance. No matter how far apart their fleets were, they could coordinate their attacks like a single giant organism. But the quantum communication system started having cascading failures. Messages would arrive scrambled or completely changed. Orders to retreat became orders to attack. Coordinates for safe rally points led ships directly into enemy territory. Dr. Nix ran thousands of diagnostic tests on the system, but she could find no cause for the failures. The quantum computers were working perfectly. The communication arrays showed no damage. Everything should have worked exactly as designed, but somehow the system was destroying itself from the inside. As the failures got worse, Zephyrian fleets became scattered and confused. Ships lost contact with their commanders and had to make decisions alone. The perfect coordination that made them so dangerous fell apart, and they began losing battles they should have won easily. All three sides blamed their enemies for these mysterious problems. The Krex accused the Zephyrians of using unknown technology to steal their supplies. The Vorthans accused the Krex of somehow corrupting their spy network. The Zephyrians accused both sides of working together to sabotage their communications. The accusations made everyone angrier and more desperate. Each side began taking bigger risks and making more dangerous attacks. If the enemy was using mysterious new weapons, then they had to strike harder and faster before. It was too late, but some of the smarter commanders began to notice patterns in the chaos. Admiral Vexstar was studying star charts in his command center when he noticed something strange. Every Krex convoy that had disappeared was carrying supplies that his forces needed desperately. Every fake intelligence report that misled the Vorthans helped his attack succeed. Every Zephyrian communication failure happened at exactly the wrong time for their forces. It was almost like someone was watching all three sides and helping them destroy each other. The thought was so ridiculous that he pushed it out of his mind. Who could possibly be watching the entire galaxy and manipulating three different advanced civilizations at the same time? It would take incredible intelligence, perfect knowledge of all their technologies, and resources that no single species could possibly have. 3 star systems away, Dr. Nix was having similar thoughts. The quantum communication failures were too perfectly timed to be random accidents. Someone with an understanding of Zephyrian technology was causing these problems on purpose, but that was impossible. The Zephyrians had the most advanced science in the galaxy. Their neural enhancements let them think in ways that other species could not even understand. No primitive species could possibly comprehend their technology well enough to sabotage it. Minister Qualdar had stopped sleeping entirely. He spent his days staring at intelligence reports that made no sense and battle reports that described impossible defeats. His alliance was falling apart, and he could not understand why. Late at night, when his blue skin had turned pale with exhaustion, he sometimes wondered if someone was playing all three sides against each other. But who could be smart enough to manipulate the greatest powers in the galaxy? Who could have the resources and knowledge to interfere with Krek's logistics, Vorthan intelligence, and Zephyrian technology all at the same time? The answer would have been obvious if any of them had bothered to think about it. For 3 years, a quiet human had sat in council meetings, taking careful notes and asking polite questions. She had listened to them describe their technologies, their tactics, and their weaknesses in great detail. She had learned everything about them, while they learned nothing about her. But they were all too busy fighting each other to remember the quiet observer, who had warned them that this war would solve nothing. They had laughed at her peaceful solutions and called her primitive and weak. Now their fleets were bleeding across the galaxy, and none of them understood why everything was going so wrong. They would understand soon enough. After 8 months of brutal warfare, the 3 greatest powers in the galaxy prepared for their final battle. The Aldrin system would be the graveyard, where 1 civilization would claim victory and 2 would die forever. Admiral Vextar arrived first with the surviving ships of the Kreks, Hegemony. He has started the war with over 2,000 vessels, but mysterious losses and endless battles had reduced his fleet to 600 ships. The Iron Fist still led them, scarred and battered, but still deadly. Every ship was loaded with the heaviest weapons the Kreks could build. "Today we finish this," Vextar announced to his commanders. "The Vorthans and Zephyrians think they can hide behind technology and numbers. We will show them that nothing beats Krek's steel and Krek's courage." His officers roared their agreement. They had been fighting for months, and they wanted to end this war with one massive battle. Win or lose, at least it would be over. Minister Qualdar brought what remained of the Vorthan alliance. 43 species had joined his cause, but 8 months of war had reduced that number to 21. Many of his allies had lost too many ships or simply decided the cost was too high. His surviving fleet had 900 ships of every size and design, from massive Aquarian battleships to tiny Centauri fighters. "We fight for freedom," Qualdar told his mixed crews over the communication channels. The Kreks would enslave every free being in the galaxy. The Zephyrians would turn us all into servants of their machines. We must win, or lose everything we care about. The Alliance fleet spread out in a complex formation that had taken months to perfect. Each species had different strengths, and Qualdar had learned how to use them all together. Dr. Nix approached with the Zephyrian Collective's remaining forces. She had started with 300 ships, but her fleet now numbered only 150. Each ship was still a miracle of advanced technology, but the communication problems had made coordination almost impossible. Our vessels moved like individual predators, instead of a unified pack. Calculate. Victory probability, she commanded her enhanced brain. Quantum computers in her skull worked for several seconds before giving an answer. Victory probability, 31%. Mutual destruction probability, 68%. Total defeat probability, less than 1%. Dr. Nix found these odds acceptable. Even if the collective did not win, they would make sure their enemies could never threaten anyone again. The three fleets faced each other across the empty space of the Aldrin system. Hundreds of ships on each side, all loaded with weapons that could crack planets. The tension was so thick that it seemed to make the space itself vibrate with potential energy. Admiral Vexstar opened a communication channel to all ships. I will give both of you one chance to surrender. Kneel before the Krex hegemony, and your people will be allowed to live as slaves. Refuse, and we will burn your worlds until nothing is left but ashes and memories. Minister Koldar responded immediately. The Vorthan Trade Federation and our allies will never bow to tyrants. We would rather die free than live in chains. Dr. Nix's silver eyes glowed brighter as she calculated attack patterns. The Zephyrian Collective finds your biological emotional responses inefficient. We will remove both threats to galactic stability with optimal precision. The three commanders cut their communication channels and prepared to begin the battle that would decide the future of the galaxy. Then space around them exploded with new contacts. Hundreds of ships suddenly appeared on every sensor screen. They had been there all along, hidden by stealth technology that was better than anything the three powers had ever seen. The new ships were sleek and gray, with designs that looked almost familiar, but somehow wrong. The alien commanders stared at their screens in confusion and growing fear. Where had these ships come from? Who did they belong to? The designs looked almost like human ships, but that was impossible. Humans barely knew how to leave their own star system. A communication signal reached every ship in the Aldrin system. The voice that spoke was calm, quiet, and completely human. Attention, Galactic Council members. This is Commander Sarah Chun of the Terran Strategic Command. You are all now prisoners of war. For several seconds, nobody could speak. The idea was so impossible that their brains could not process it. Then Admiral Vexstar found his voice. Impossible, he roared over the open channel. Humans are primitives. You barely have spaceflight. Where did you get a fleet like this? Sarah's voice remained calm and professional. You underestimated us, Admiral. For 3 years, I sat in your council meetings, listening to your tactics, studying your technologies, documenting your weaknesses. While you fought each other, we reverse-engineered every piece of technology you carelessly displayed. While you ignored the primitive humans, we built a fleet specifically designed to counter your strengths. Minister Qualdar's blue skin had turned almost white with shock. This is a trick. Some kind of illusion. The humans could never build ships like these. You taught us everything we needed to know, Sarah replied. Your arrogance was your downfall. You spent 3 years telling us exactly how your weapons work, exactly how your defenses operate, exactly what tactics you use in battle. You did it right in front of me, and you laughed when I asked questions. Dr. Nix ran rapid calculations in her enhanced brain. The numbers did not make sense. Human cognitive capacity is insufficient for advanced starship engineering. This fleet represents technology beyond your species' capabilities. Sarah's laugh was quiet and not very nice. Dr. Nix, you told me yourself that human brains are primitive and inefficient. Did you ever stop to think about what inefficient might mean? Your enhanced brains think in straight lines and perfect logic. Our primitive brains think in ways you cannot predict or understand. The human fleet began moving into position around the three alien forces. Their formation was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. It did not follow any of the standard tactical doctrines that all civilized species used. Admiral Vextar decided that talking was pointless. The correct way was to solve problems with violence. All ships attack the human fleet. Show these primitives what real warriors can do. The Krek's fleet charged forward, their heavy weapons firing at maximum power. Massive energy beams that could melt asteroids lanced out toward the human ships. The human vessels moved like dancers, flowing around the attacks with impossible grace. Their ships seemed to know where every shot would be before it was fired. None of the Krek's weapons found their targets. Then the human ships fired back. Their weapons were not energy beams or missiles. They were solid metal slugs fired at incredible speeds. The Kreks had designed their armor to stop energy weapons, but these kinetic projectiles punched through their defenses like paper. Impossible. Vextar watched his ships explode one after another. Our armor is the strongest in the galaxy. Your armor is designed to stop Zephyrian energy weapons and Vortham plasma cannons, Sarah explained as her ships continued their attack. We studied those weapons for 3 years and built something completely different. The Vorthan Alliance tried their swarm tactics, sending hundreds of small ships to overwhelm the human fleet with numbers. This had worked against the Zephyrian technology before, but the human ships moved in perfect coordination, like they were all controlled by a single mind. They positioned themselves so that the Vorthan swarm could not surround them. Every human ship knew exactly where every other human ship would be at any moment. Your swarm tactics require chaos and confusion, Sarah said as the Vorthan ships flew into carefully prepared crossfire zones. We studied how you fight and designed a formation that turns your strength into weakness. Dr. Nix deployed her remaining ships in a complex pattern that used quantum mechanics to make them partially exist in several places at once. This made them almost impossible to target. The human ships ignored the quantum effects entirely. Instead of trying to target the Zephyrian vessels where they were, they fired at where the ships had to be according to the laws of physics. Your quantum positioning follows mathematical rules, Sarah explained as Zephyrian ships began exploding despite their advanced defenses. Mathematics is the same everywhere in the universe, even for primitive humans. In less than 2 hours, the greatest military forces in the galaxy had been completely defeated. The space around Aldrin was full of disabled ships and floating debris. A few vessels from each fleet were still intact, but only because the humans had chosen not to destroy them. Admiral Vextar sat in the command center of the Iron Fist, staring at displays that showed his entire fleet destroyed or captured. How? He whispered. How did primitives defeat the greatest powers in the galaxy? Sarah's voice came through the communication system one final time. You called us primitives because we had only one world. You called us weak because we had small ships. You called us stupid because we asked for peace instead of war. But you made one big mistake. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was as cold as the space between stars. You taught us everything about you while learning nothing about us. You ignored the quiet human in the corner, never wondering what she was thinking or what she was planning. You forgot that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you do not take seriously. The human fleet began moving again, surrounding the survivors from all 3 alien powers. 6 months after the Battle of Aldrin, the galaxy looked completely different. The massive space station where the Galactic Council met was still the same, but everything else had changed. Human patrol ships moved through the space around the station like silent guardians. Their gray hulls were marked with the blue and white symbol of Earth, and their weapons were always ready but never threatening. Inside the great meeting hall, the curved rows of seats were much emptier than before. Many species had lost so much during the war that they could not send representatives anymore. Others had discovered that their former allies were not interested in helping them rebuild. But the biggest change was who sat where. Sarah-chan no longer sat in the back corner. Her chair was now at the front of the hall, in the position that had once belonged to the most powerful species in the galaxy. She wore the same simple gray uniform she had always worn, but now it carried the insignia of the Terran Strategic Command. Behind her sat a dozen other human officers, all taking careful notes, just as she had done for 3 years. The former powers sat in very different places. Now, Admiral Vexstar was no longer an admiral. The Krex hegemony had been broken into hundreds of small territories, each one limited to a single star system. The species that had once commanded 1,000 worlds now controlled exactly one planet each, and human observers watched everything they did. Vexstar himself sat in the section reserved for minor species, wearing simple clothes instead of his battle armor. His forearms were thinner than before, and his scars had faded to pale lines. The man who had once terrified half the galaxy now looked like a tired old soldier. Minister Qualdar sat nearby, representing what was left of the Vorthan Trade Federation. The great network of trade routes and merchant ships was gone, replaced by human-controlled shipping lanes that served everyone equally. Queldar's blue skin had grown pale over the months, and he moved slowly like someone who had aged decades in a single year. Dr. Nix was the most changed of all. The Zephyrian Collective had been dissolved entirely, their advanced technology confiscated by human scientists. The quantum computers that had enhanced her brain were gone, leaving her with only normal organic intelligence. Her silver eyes were now just ordinary brown, and she had to think one thought at a time like everyone else. All 3 of them sat in the same section, marked with signs that said, "Supervised Territories." They could speak during council meetings, but only when asked direct questions. They could not make proposals or vote on anything important. The meeting began as it did every month now, with Sarah standing to address the assembled representatives. The Galactic Peace Enforcement Report shows continued improvement in most sectors, she announced. Piracy incidents are down by 93%. Armed conflicts between species have stopped entirely. Trade disputes are being resolved through negotiation instead of warfare. She looked around the room at faces that were still learning to hide their fear and resentment. Food distribution to worlds affected by the war is ahead of schedule. Medical supplies are reaching refugee populations. Reconstruction efforts are proceeding as planned. A representative from the Aquarian Federation raised one of her fins. "Commander Chun, how long will human oversight continue? Our people are eager to govern themselves again." Sarah smiled, but it was not a warm expression. "The oversight will continue until we are confident that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated. Some species are adapting well to the new order. Others still seem to think that peace is only temporary." She touched a control on her tablet, and a holographic display appeared above the center of the hall. It showed a detailed map of the galaxy, with every star system color-coded. Green systems are those where local governments have accepted peaceful cooperation and resource sharing. Yellow systems are those where tensions remain high, but no violence has occurred. Red systems are those where human intervention has been necessary to prevent conflicts. Most of the galaxy was green now, but there were still scattered patches of yellow and a few red spots. The Rigel Collective attempted to restart their slave-raiding operations last month, Sora continued. Human peacekeeping forces shut down the operation and arrested the leaders. The Tau Ceti Mining Consortium tried to claim exclusive rights to an entire asteroid field, violating resource-sharing agreements. They have been reminded of the new regulations. Former Admiral Vextar could not stay quiet any longer. He stood up slowly, his massive frame still impressive even without his armor. "How long will this continue?" he demanded. "You have destroyed the natural order of the galaxy. The strong are meant to rule the weak. This enforced peace goes against every law of nature." The hall became completely silent. Even after 6 months, most representatives were still afraid to challenge human authority directly. Sarah turned to face Vextar with the same calm expression she had worn for 3 years in this very room. "You are right about one thing, former Admiral. The strong do rule the weak." She gestured to the holographic display. "Humanity is now the strongest military power in the galaxy. We rule through that strength. The difference is that we choose to use our strength to protect others instead of conquering them." Vextar's scars darkened with anger. "You call this protection? You have reduced proud warrior species to begging for permission to defend themselves." "No," Sarah replied quietly. "We have stopped proud warrior species from murdering billions of innocent people for resources they did not need." She walked closer to Vextar, and her voice became even quieter. "Tell me, former Admiral, how many civilian populations did the Kreks enslave during your expansion campaigns?" Vextar's mouth opened, then closed. He could not answer without admitting to crimes that everyone in the room already knew about. "How many garden worlds did you strip mine until they became lifeless rocks?" Sarah continued. "How many research stations did you destroy just to demonstrate your power?" The former Kreks leader sat down heavily. Unable to meet her eyes, Sarah turned back to address the entire hall. The old order was not natural or inevitable. It was a choice. The strong chose to prey on the weak instead of protecting them. The advanced chose to dominate the primitive instead of helping them grow. She returned to her position at the front of the room. Humanity has chosen differently. We choose to use our strength to build instead of destroy. We choose to share our knowledge instead of hoarding it. We choose to protect the weak instead of conquering them. Dr. Nix spoke for the first time in months, her voice strange without the artificial enhancement she was used to. But what happens when humanity becomes corrupted by power, as all species do? Who will stop you from becoming what we were? It was a good question, and everyone in the room wanted to hear the answer. Sarah considered her words carefully. "Dr. Nix, you spent years telling me that human brains are primitive and inefficient. You were right about the inefficient part. Human thinking is messy and unpredictable. We argue with ourselves, doubt our own decisions, and constantly question whether we are doing the right thing." She gestured to the human officers behind her. "Every decision we make is argued about and examined from every possible angle. We do not have your perfect logic or absolute confidence. Our inefficiency is what keeps us honest." Minister Quoldar spoke up from his seat. "And what if we refuse to accept this new order? What if some species decide they prefer the old ways?" Sarah's smile returned, cold and sharp as winter. "Then you will join the red systems on the map. And human peacekeeping forces will remind you why that is a poor choice." She touched her tablet again, and the holographic display changed to show detailed readouts of human military strength. Ships, weapons, soldiers, bases. The numbers were staggering. Humanity spent 3 years learning from the best military minds in the galaxy. We took your tactics and improved them. We took your technology and made it better. We took your strategies and adapted them to our purposes. The display showed human fleets moving through space, their movements perfectly coordinated and completely unstoppable. "You taught us how to build the perfect war machine," Sarah continued. "But you forgot to ask what we would do with it once we had it." She turned off the display and looked around the room at faces that were finally beginning to understand what they were dealing with. The galaxy is at peace for the first time in recorded history. Trade routes are open to everyone. Resources are shared fairly. Weaker species are protected from stronger ones. Children grow up without fear of conquest or enslavement. Her voice became gentler, almost sad. This is what I tried to offer you 3 years ago. Compromise instead of conquest. Cooperation instead of conflict. Peace instead of war. She sat down in her chair and looked directly at the 3 former leaders of galactic civilization. You laughed at those offers. You called them primitive and weak and stupid. You chose war instead of peace, and war is exactly what you got. The hall remained silent for a long time. Finally, a young representative from one of the minor species raised her hand nervously. Commander Chen, what happens now? What does humanity want from the galaxy? Sarah's expression softened slightly. We want what we have always wanted. A place where different species can coexist peacefully. A galaxy where problems are solved with words instead of weapons.